This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hello, this is Simon Brew, and a very warm welcome to a special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
And the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Film Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew. As always, that's absolutely everything you need to know about me. Ordinarily, well, and this episode as well, the podcast is about the stories of films. We go behind the scenes of films a little bit. We talk about the development stories, production stories, release stories. And in fact, every now and then what we do is we get the filmmakers in to tell the stories themselves. And that's what's happening with this special episode of the podcast as well. I am a huge Aardman animation nerd, so this one is a real pleasure for me that we're going to have a chat about 2009's new release, a Shaun The Sheep Movie, Farmageddon. The way this is going to work is I'm going to play you a clip, and then you will hear my conversation with the film's co-directors, Will Becher and Richard Phelan, just to explain one or two other members of personnel whose name might pop up throughout the conversation. Mark Burton, who worked on the stories and characters for Shaun the Sheep. Likewise, Nick Park, the legendary Nick Park. He comes up as well. David Sproxton is the outgoing managing director of Aardman Animation, and I think in the midst of it all too, we talk about Aardman co-founder Peter Lord, who co-directed films like Chicken Run, and also he directed The Pirates in an Adventure with Scientists. In terms of Farmageddon, it's the follow-up to 2015's wonderful Shaun the Sheep movie. The script for this one was penned by John Brown and Mark Burton. Story came from Nick Park. Characters by Mark Burton and Nick Park. I should also note at this point that Mark Burton was also the executive producer of the film. Casting-wise, there is a voice cast, even though no one actually says any words. Those mutterings and mumblings were done by Justin Fletcher, Mr. Tumble, bless him, Joe Sugg, John Sparks, Kate Harbour, David Holt and Chris Morrell. Here then is a clip from the movie, and then I'm going to take you straight into the interview.
It traveled light years through space to find intelligent life. Shaun's back, but there's a new arrival in town who's a little alien. Meet Lou.
So that was a clip from Farmageddon, a Shaun the Sheep movie, which I believe is the correct title. Is there a colon in there? Should there be a colon? Where are you on colons in movie titles?
I don't know. I'm going to say yes.
All right, we'll go with a colon. So I'm joined by the directors, Will Becher and Richard Phelan. So Will, can you say hello so we can recognise your voice first?
Certainly, I'm Will. Hi.
And you must be...
And I'm Rich.
So you two now, this is your directorial debut, and now you're major international film directors. And at the point this is being recorded, I think you've opened the film already in Germany.
Yes,
is that right?
That's
so
correct.
Have you had like the posh studio phone call with like the box office report on the opening week?
We had the posh dinner with the studio heads.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, actually, we were in Paris at the weekend because the film just premiered in Paris.
Yes.
And we went out with the heads of Studio Canal, who financed the film.
Yes.
Took us for a lovely meal. It was very nice.
They were very nice, very lovely.
Yes?
Yeah.
Did they let you have dessert? I mean, how happy were they?
That's the indicator.
I think so. I mean, if they just get rid of you after a starter and a bit of bread, then you're in trouble,
fantastic.
aren't you?
They were very nice.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, future films then. That's it. Major. One of the things, I just love the reachability of this film. I'm going to come back to that quite a lot, just because I'm a boring nerd. And at all times assume that I'm thick and that I know nothing because I find the whole process of stop frame both fascinating and completely baffling. It's just but wonderfully simple and incredibly complicated to my boring old eyes. But with this one, even though there was clearly no compulsion to do a direct sequel, and you mark your card out very early, this is not a direct sequel. I just wonder, at the point you come in and say you're going to do this film, there's still parameters presumably in place, that there are still requirements of the character. There's still what you can do, and I wonder if you can just start by just taking us through those.
Yeah, so we've both worked in the Shaun the Sheep series and on the first film. So Shaun has very defined sort of like rules about his character and the universe he inhabits, and so we have to sort of remain sort of true to those. But then at the same time, we were sort of like, we wanted it to feel like the adventures of Shaun the Sheep rather than a direct sequel to the first one. So we were like, in the first film he goes on this adventure where he leaves the farm to find his dad, and it's like, what could we bring to the farm? And so we talked around a lot, and then we realised that sort of isolated farmsteads are sort of like part of like UFO folklore, and so we started to sort of snowball from there. So we could have crop circles, we could have secret government organisations, and then eventually we could go into outer space.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the film, it's evolved as you would expect over the years that we've been working on it. But there are certain situations where we've put Shaun in the story and it felt like it wasn't really working, or the environment around it wasn't right. So sometimes he'll inform, when we test the audience, we test it with people in the crew, and there are just certain parameters around his character, the way he might react in a certain situation. We know if it's not quite true to him.
So outer space works and a farm works, but there's something in between that doesn't.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So at what point, because I remember talking, because you were gracious enough to host us at Aardman, and we came and had a look round and clearly stole lots of stuff. It's on eBay now.
Oh, that's where
where it all went. Yeah, that missing character in the final scene. But David Sproxton came in, who's of course the outgoing managing director of Aardman. He talked about how Aardman tries to prepare people to direct, but doesn't really think that you can. You'll never know how to direct until you direct. So can you talk through that process at the point where your ascension was revealed to you and confirmed, and really what you've learnt about that over the last year or two?
Do you want to go first?
Well, I guess we should. The backstory that you've heard briefly is that we both worked with Shaun a lot, and also we've both come from a sort of film school background. So I studied in a college of art making a short film of my own, and I've always had that ambition to direct and make films. And I think Rich is, again, it's a film school, going to the National Film School and coming out with a desire to tell stories. The way it happened when we were asked to direct the film together was that it was a sort of, once in a lifetime. This is Aardman. They've not made that many feature films, so to be asked to take Shaun the Sheep and basically direct his second film was an amazing opportunity, and we're both excited about being able to work together on it and create something new with it.
Yeah, I think as well, for me personally, I joined Shaun the Sheep as a storyboard artist, and then I progressed to being a writer on the series, and then I was head of story on Farmers Llamas. So it's like a sort of gradual increase of responsibility with sort of Shaun himself, and then sort of when they said, would you like to direct this one, it's like absolutely. And it's sort of like I felt like I'd learned enough of the process of the Aardman Studio system to go, okay, I know how this is going to work. And sort of the thing that I've sort of really enjoyed about directing is just working with all the crew, because it's sort of like there's such an amazingly talented bunch, and so like me and Will will say, oh, how about this and how about that, and then they just go, leave it with us, and they sort of go and build these amazing sets or these really intricate puppets, and you just go, that's perfect.
I remember Mark Burton saying about the first one, it's like being given the keys to a Rolls Royce and being able to drive it, and it is a bit like that, because we're surrounded by the most amazing resource, and it's incredible, really, the level of knowledge that's already in the building, before we start asking for things.
The point you made about Aardman don't make that many features, certainly in terms of stop frame, the vast majority of them as well have been, and I'm not saying you're not, but they've been directed by Aardman royalty. You're following, the Peter Lords and the Nick Parks and Richard Starsack on the last one as well. What kind of resource is that for you to tap into? Because presumably it comes a point where you can't be intimidated by that, and you've just got to pillage them as much as possible.
Well, yes, and they were very forthright with ideas and suggestions for us in a good way. You know, they respected if for some reason we didn't necessarily think it would work or didn't agree with a particular idea, they respected that. But they have sort of nurtured us. We've both worked with all those directors over the years, so they sort of we have a good working relationship. They watch the film every 3 months or so, give us notes, and we would gratefully accept all the ones we really liked.
And the others?
The others, it's the same on every process. So, like, for example, on Early Man, Nick would screen it to all the directors, and then they give notes. And so it's like, what makes the story stronger or truer to what you were trying to do? And then you go, that's perfect. Because even the storytelling process, we often sort of brainstorm hundreds of jokes looking for the sort of 5 best. But it's like we have to go through all the other 95 to find them. So it's like Pete and Dave and Richard and Nick and Mark give us sort of like these really detailed notes. It's like they're all trying to make the film stronger, but like sometimes it's sort of they'll clash or they won't quite sort of line up correctly, and so we'll cherry pick what would work the best and then sort of infuse it with how we want to do it.
Going round, one of the most fascinating things I think in your facility, again to an outsider, is this CBB board, which I gather is the a holdover from the DreamWorks day that could be better. That during, I think that's what it is. That still in existence? The whole idea that during the film you isolate. Why am I explaining this to you? I mean, crying here. But
what's this board?
What's this board? What's
we knew nothing about this.
But this board where throughout the process you pick up the shots that, as I understand it, that you just want to come back to and just have another look at and something like that. And I mean, I'm fascinated just on the minutiae of something like that you've been on both sides of that process now. That presumably you've put things on the board. Now you're in a position of you've got to decide where to prioritise, what to fix.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you could zero in on something like that. Because as I understand it, you spend half the time on the floor and then half the time in editorial and just fixing lots of stuff. Can you just explain that a bit for us?
Yeah, we should both talk about it because we probably come at it from slightly different angles. But the fact is, with any stop motion animation where you put all the emphasis on the planning of it, because when you come to the animator actually doing the performance frame by frame, it's very, very hard to change something once it's finished. So we try to get each shot ready with storyboards and acting it out and doing lots of conversations with the animator, because maybe they'll do a shot and it will take a day, or maybe it'll take 2 weeks, or maybe it'll take 4 weeks. Not every shot lands exactly as we want it, and it is always something you have to see in context, but there's so much detail within every shot. And with a stop motion film where there's no dialogue, we really rely on that performance to get across the idea, the bigger idea.
Yeah, I would say, like, we've had some shots where they've come in early on and you think, I don't know if that sells it just yet, and so they've gone on the list, but then like once the shots around them start to sort of appear, and then like you can sort of refine the pacing of the scene, then you go, actually no, they're fine, so they go off the CBB board. It's just the ones where you go, clearly now we need to clarify a key story point, and the original version isn't quite landing it, so we'll just go back to the same animator and go, come and watch the whole scene so you can see how it fits into context, and now how we're going to have to sort of slightly refine it and change it so that they understand why we're doing it, rather than just go do it again but better, because that's sort of like really nebulous and vague. It's like, this is why it needs to be different.
Yeah, it is subjective as well. So I might see a shot that I'm not happy with, and Rich will see it and go, oh no, that's fine, that works. And we have that process where we're working on a tight schedule, we can't redo everything we want to, so it really does become about what really makes the scene or breaks it.
I spoke to a few people over the years who've co-directed, and they've got various different methods to how to deal with the moments where they don't agree with each other. So I've heard people say that they both have to agree, or it's completely out. Someone's got the power of veto, or you just go off into the car park and have a rumble or something like that. And so, what's yours? I mean, were you two working closely together before? Were you just thrown relatively randomly together? I don't know. How did you two come together, and then how did you find a working methodology between the two of you?
So we've both worked at Aardman for quite a long time, and so it wasn't. So we've known each other and worked on the same projects, although not in the same departments. The really important part is there's 2.5 years of prep to shooting it, and so every sort of debate and discussion takes place there. So like There's moments where you've gone like, I think it should be this way, and I've done the same thing, but it's like it makes you justify your choices and why you think it should be the way it is. But we also pitch it to our producer Paul and the writer Mark they're like our sounding board to go, does that make sense? Is
mediators.
That right? Yeah.
Mediators. See, we're getting back to the rumble in the car park now.
When we disagree, Paul comes in and sort of smooths things over between us, or he just goes, no, that's too expensive, both ideas are wrong.
Yeah, you're both wrong.
You're both wrong.
We do, we spent, at the beginning we spent a lot of time in the same room making decisions together, and a lot of the time they lined up. When we're looking at the visual development or the story, we generally had an agreement. I think we've got similar aesthetic in terms of comedy and performance and that kind of thing. And it was just sometimes it just came down to personal choice. What colour should that be, red or green? I like red, you like green.
Yeah, Paul likes blue.
Nothing really broke it. I don't think we ever really fell out. There was no.
I could invent some clickbait stories if you want. I mean, I'm quite happy to. But
then they fought.
Yeah, they did.
But
because in theory, the higher up you go, the lonelier it is as well. I mean, that's generally the theory in any business or something like that. And here you are at the top. I mean, you've been prefects in school, haven't you?
That's a good point. I mean, that outweighs those moments where we don't agree are far outweighed by the sort of support we have for each other, because there are so many things. Not every decision is easy, and it's great having someone to bounce off for ideas and to share this huge workload, which without two directors would probably break one or take 10 years to complete.
Can you just talk briefly about, because you say there's no post-production, or there's little post-production and editing, that most of it's done in preparation, but conversely over the last few films, Aardman's just had a very slight and subtle increasing reliance on CG for certain moments within that. So has that in any way changed the editing process of the film? Has it given you a little bit more time in post-production to effectively edit your film?
The edit, because it's basically like a live action, is you shoot.
Yeah.
So in stop motion, it's the other way around. So all the editing is done beforehand. So our editor Sim cut together the film over 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So that when we start production, we go to see the animators. Like, we've tried every permutation of an idea, and then because we knew it was going to be a sci-fi film, we had to have CG elements to embellish moments, or sort of like give one of our characters has like intergalactic powers.
Yes.
And so, we would talk about how we're going to do that. Really early on, we had sort of technical directors come in, and some elements we prevised as well. And so it's a sort of very long process before we even begin shooting. So all of that is done beforehand, and then whilst it's being shot, our VFX house are R&Ding and sort of like testing everything. So the spaceship, there are moments where it is CGI, but they 3D scanned the original sort of built sort of prop spaceship and things like that.
Yeah, I don't think in a way it hasn't given us more time or flexibility. I mean, our editing, because it's shot digitally compared to on film, we do see shots straight away. We don't have to send them off to London. So our editor is working on them real time. But at the end, it's always a rush to get it finished, and having CG in it, it was an added layer on top, wasn't it? It sort of enhanced it. So we still had to shoot everything that was there. If anything, we just had more sort of approvals in the process, because we had to approve the look of the effects on top of the animation.
When I came round Aardman, the posters of the films that were being shown at whatever your film night or film club, I bet you're bound to have some secret kind of Dead Poets Society style name for that somewhere along the line. But it was stuff like The Thing. And things like that. And is there anything to be read into that, or is you a bunch of movie nerds just fancied seeing films like The Thing and kind of like harder edge sci-fi stuff?
Well, we tried to. It is a family film, but we tried to sort of take references from a lot of different sci-fi elements. So we screened like The Thing, a lot of John Carpenter and sort of like Paul Verhoeven sort of films from the 80s. But then, because we also screened Arrival, which I don't think is sort of like kid friendly, but at the same time, it's just sort of trying to sort of tap into sort of like sci-fi as a genre and go, it's the big questions and things like that, sort of like it's the scale of these things that make you go, sci-fi is quite awe-inspiring. It can be quite intimate, and at the same time it's just sort of colossal sort of scapes of space. Just sort of trying to take from both.
And it says something that the crew loved it so much that they were going to sit through 2 separate lunch breaks to watch the films, because there's too much work to do to stop and down tools. But we've done it on every film we've made at Aardman. There's always those films that sort of we reference or influence us, and it's just really nice for a film studio to put up on our big screen the films that we love.
You talk about the big questions and taking influence from big sci-fi movies. It would be remiss of me not to mention that you have one of cinema's finest pick and mix sequences in the film. Does that count as one of those moments where you sat there and think, because I don't want to spoil the exact sequence, but the logistics of it as I looked at it were just baffling. It's just like just trying to get everything. Was that one of those moments where you just like, great idea at the time, and then you just, we've got to do it?
I think we're privileged in that position as directors, that we work with a writer. It's the producer who actually, Paul, he's so encouraging for those big complex ideas. If they're funny and if they make it a better film, he'll really encourage us. So we didn't hold back at all. I think we just, what are the funniest things we can do in this supermarket? And then we went to town, and it was our crew, unfortunately, that suffered the burden of making it all happen. Yeah. But they do, they're amazing at resourcefulness, and
that whole scene took a year to shoot on its own. Just 2 animators. Yeah.
It wasn't just a wheeze to get some sweets on expenses or something like that.
No, but we did have some at the wrap party. We had our own free pick and mix.
I'm sure. I mean, I fully appreciate both of you worked with and on Shaun the Sheep projects for a long time. And in terms of the sheer reachability and the resonance of this as a character, one of the things that really comes across for me is how Shaun transcends language. Without wishing to go all pretentious, but also transcends disability as well. That there's an absolute accessibility to this character, to a point where it's a kind of movie and TV character who can be appreciated by anyone, even if they don't usually. What kind of feedback do you get from that, and how does that inform the decisions that you're making, putting something together? Because there are sci-fi themes. This could have taken a slightly scarier view, but it's a scarier look. But it's clearly just as beautifully accessible.
Well, in terms of feedback, like we have people come up to us and tell us, like, my children love Shaun the Sheep, or I grew up watching Shaun the Sheep, or my grandparents watched Shaun the Sheep, which is really wonderful. I think it's more just because the way we make it is we just sit around and think of ideas from our own lives, and then sort of tell these really sort of like very personal anecdotes about things that have happened to us. And the sort of at the core of it was the honesty, because we then just translate that into Shaun's adventures and go, okay, let's try and have Shaun the Sheep do that. And it's that sort of transcends around, because everyone relates to him from sort of like from Japan to the UK. It's like everyone sees themselves in him, or they see themselves in Becher or the farmer. There's a sort of family dynamic that everyone can relate to. And it's sort of like we just stay true to that, and then that sort of is what translates around the world.
Yeah. I mean, there is a sort of moral code to Shaun in that he's eternally naughty and cheeky, but he's really good-hearted. And actually, all the characters in it, there's no one that really isn't. They're all honest and pure in their look of the world.
And by the fact that you were watching Paul Verhoeven films in preparation for this, are we expecting the third one to be like Shaun does Total Recall, or are we going a bit more RoboCop? I mean, I'll take the exclusive.
There's a bit of RoboCop in this,
actually. Is there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've done that. Can't do that.
So it's Total Recall then? Is that what I'm taking away? Total Recall it is. Gents, congratulations on the film, and thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
And there you have it. Farmageddon is in UK cinemas from the 18th of December 2019. I really like the film an awful lot. I'll be back soon with your regular episode of Film Stories. If you want to keep up to date with the Film Stories project, you can find me on Twitter at Simon Brew. You can find Film Stories at Film Stories Pod, at the Film Stories website, where you can find out about both Film Stories and Film Stories Junior print magazines and order copies, is www.filmstories.co.uk. You can find us at Facebook. Crikey, this is a list, isn't it? Facebook.com/filmstoriesonline, at youtube.com/filmstories. Also, if you've enjoyed this podcast, I hugely appreciate it if you could just take the time to subscribe at your podcast repository of choice, and ideally leave me a really glowing review. This is an independent operation, and word of mouth really is the lifeblood for Film Stories. We pay people rather than for writing and creating material rather than spending all of our money on expensive marketing materials. As a consequence, word of mouth is just a godsend to us. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for supporting. I'll be back again soon with another bunch of film stories. You all take care.